It's another Tuesday night, or is it Wednesday morning? Days blur into an endless, crushing cycle here in A&E. The air is thick with the scent of disinfectant and despair, a constant low hum of monitors and hushed anxieties. But amidst the clamor, there's a silence, a profound quietness that screams louder than any alarm, the silence of the overlooked, the invisible. And tonight, it's Richard Williams, tucked away in Cubicle 3, who embodies that silent scream. He's been here for 12 hours, an 87-year-old man who arrived via ambulance, shivering, disoriented, with a suspected UTI that's probably developed into something far more serious. 12 hours. He's got no family to badger the staff, no loud voice to demand attention. Just his quiet dignity, slowly eroding with every passing minute of neglect. I walked past earlier and saw him struggling with the call bell, his fingers gnarled with arthritis, pressing feebly, ignored by the triage nurse who was too busy dealing with a young man with a sprained ankle. A sprained ankle, for God's sake. I swear, sometimes I feel like I'm screaming into a void. I tried to flag it, of course. Dr. Miller, I'd said, my voice tight with frustration. Richard Williams in Cubicle 3, he's been waiting an age. He's declining, needs a proper assessment, not just another paracetamol. Miller barely looked up from his notes. Eleonora, we've got urgent cases. He's just a common cold. They're old. It's not life-threatening. We'll get to him, just old. That phrase, that dismissive wave of the hand, it's the mantra of this place, the unspoken rule. It's a cancer on our humanity, a slow, insidious poison that numbs us to the suffering of those who built this very society. Richard isn't just old. He's a man, a human being who deserves the same care, the same urgent attention as anyone else. More, perhaps, given his vulnerability. I saw him earlier, trying to reach his water glass, his hand shaking, and no one there to help. I saw his quiet shame when he soiled himself because no one answered his plea for the commode. His eyes, full of a deep, aching humiliation, met mine. In that moment, I wasn't just a nurse. I was a witness to a crime. A crime of indifference committed by a system that has forgotten its fundamental purpose. This isn't about medical diagnoses anymore. It's about dignity. It's about basic human respect. I've seen them left for hours on trolleys and corridors, their blankets askew, their personal histories reduced to a colored wristband and a bed number. I've heard colleagues sigh impatiently when an elderly patient struggles to articulate their symptoms, as if a lifetime of experience is less valuable than the quick, concise answer of a younger patient. We are meant to be caring, compassionate. But here, the elderly are often treated like a burden, an inconvenient drain on resources, an obstacle in the fast-paced, high-stakes game of emergency medicine. It breaks my heart. It truly does. This isn't the NHS I signed up for. This isn't care. It's a factory processing units, and the old units are simply shunted to the back of the queue. They built this country, fought its wars, paid their taxes, and what do they get in return? A sterile corridor, a 12-hour wait, and the soul-crushing realization that they are, in the eyes of society, disposable. We're losing our humanity, one ignored call bell, one dismissive comment, one humiliated elder at a time. And frankly, if we can't even afford the dignity of care to our most vulnerable, what does that say about us? What kind of future are we building if this is how we treat our past? We must do better. We must. The air in A&E tonight is thick with the metallic tang of antiseptic and the heavier, cloying scent of desperation. Another shift, another war zone, but the real fight isn't against a virus or a trauma. It's against the relentless tide of indifference. My heart aches, a constant, dull throb for the souls left to drift in this abyss, particularly the elderly. They come to us in their most vulnerable state, seeking solace, seeking care, and too often, what they find is a cold shoulder and a colder trolley in a corridor. I think of Richard Williams, 86 years young, though you wouldn't know it from how he's been treated. He arrived this morning, brought in by ambulance after a fall at home. No visible breaks, just profoundly disoriented and frankly terrified. 8 hours he's been sat there on a hard plastic chair, slumped to one side, his thin cardigan barely covering his frail frame. 8 hours. We're so understaffed, so overwhelmed that a man like Richard, who's contributed his entire life to this country, is reduced to a statistic, a waiting number in a queue that never truly moves. I tried to get him a bed, just a cubicle, something with a modicum of privacy. Doctor, Miller, bless her pragmatic soul, just waved a dismissive hand. Eleonora, he's stable. We have a lorry crash victim coming in, a potential cardiac arrest. Richard can wait. It's probably just a bit of confusion. Old age, old age. As if that's a diagnosis, a justification for neglect. As if 86 years of life means 86 years of being unworthy of basic human consideration. But it's not just Richard, is it? It's Mrs. Henderson, left on a war corridor last week, her incontinence pad overflowing because no one had the time or perhaps the inclination to check on her for hours. She lay there, mortified, soaked, exposed to every passing staff member and visitor. The shame in her eyes, it haunts me. It's Mr. Davies who developed a deep pressure sore because he wasn't turned often enough, deemed a low priority because his family wasn't there to advocate for him to kick up a fuss. We talk about person-centered care in our policy, but here, on the front line, it often feels like system-centered survival. We've become desensitized, haven't we? Society, and by extension, our precious NHS, seems to have internalized this insidious idea that the elderly are a burden. They're bed blockers, resource drains, a problem to be managed, not cherished individuals with a lifetime of stories and experiences. Their voices are frail, easily ignored amidst the clamor of younger, louder, more urgent cases. They're stripped of their dignity piece by painful piece until they are, in effect, rendered invisible. I look at Richard again, his head bowed, the sparse gray hair on his temples catching the harsh fluorescent light. He's not asking for a miracle cure. He's asking for a kind word, a warm blanket, a moment of privacy. He's asking to be seen, to be acknowledged as a human being worthy of respect. My hands are tied. I'm one nurse against a torrent of demand, a crumbling infrastructure, and a culture that increasingly equates age with expendability. I fetch him a fresh cup of water, gently place my hand on his shoulder. He startles, then offers a weak, grateful smile. That smile breaks my heart every time. What does it say about us, about our values, when we allow this to happen? When the very system designed to heal inflicts such profound emotional wounds? This isn't just a medical failure. It's a moral one. It's a betrayal at the bedside, a stark reflection of a society that has forgotten how to care for its own, how to honor those who paved the way. We preach compassion, but we practice calculated neglect. And every time I witness it, a part of me dies with them. This can't continue. We must do better. We simply must. The fluorescent lights of A&E hum, a relentless, sterile buzz that does little to mask the constant, low thrum of human suffering. Another night, another corridor packed with people, and my gut clenches with that familiar mix of exhaustion and absolute fury. Fury, because this isn't just about overcrowding. It's about dignity stripped bare again and again under our very noses. I look at Richard Williams, tucked away in cubicle 3, if you can call a flimsy curtain space tucked away. He's 87, arrived hours ago after a fall at home. He's confused, disoriented, and has been calling out for his wife, Mary, who passed 5 years ago. He was soaked through when he arrived urine, a clear sign he'd been lying there for a while. We cleaned him, dressed him, but he's still here 8 hours later, waiting for a bed that won't materialize, waiting for a doctor who, quite frankly, sees him as less urgent than the young man with a sprained ankle. Dr. Miller walked past earlier, barely glancing at Richard. Just a bit of delirium, Eleonora. He's stable. We've got real emergencies piling up. Real emergencies. As if Richard's terror, his complete loss of bearings, isn't real. As if being left in a busy, terrifying environment for hours on end, feeling utterly abandoned, isn't an emergency of the soul. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Miller by his starched lapels and force him to look, truly look, at the fear in Richard's eyes. But I didn't. I just smoothed Richard's blanket and promised him a cup of tea, a hollow comfort in the face of such profound systemic neglect. This isn't an isolated incident. Not by a long shot. I've seen Mrs. Davies, 92, left with a tray of untouched food, unable to feed herself, while staff rushed past, too busy to notice her quiet despair. I've seen Mr. Henderson, a decorated war veteran, shouting in distress, needing the toilet, ignored until he inevitably soiled himself, only to then be met with exasperated sighs and thinly veiled irritation. The lack of privacy, the sheer indignity of it all, is horrifying. We wouldn't treat an animal with such disregard, let alone a human being who has contributed a lifetime to this society. This sterile environment, this cold, clinical machine, has a way of dehumanizing the vulnerable. It's not just the beds or the funding or the staff shortages. It's a culture, a chilling indifference that creeps in, whispering that the elderly are a burden, a drain on resources, their lives somehow less valuable than others. They're seen as statistics, bed blockers, rather than individuals with stories, memories, and an inherent right to dignity in their final years. We, the NHS, are supposed to be the custodians of care, but we're failing them spectacularly. My heart aches with a helplessness that borders on despair. I advocate, I speak up, I try to provide that sliver of comfort, that moment of connection. But I'm just one voice against an ocean of bureaucratic apathy and societal prejudice. How can we call ourselves a compassionate nation when we let our elders lie forgotten, humiliated, and terrified in our corridors? When we allow our health system to become a conveyor belt of neglect for those who need us most? This isn't just a medical problem. It's a moral crisis, a stark, damning reflection of who we truly are. And until we confront that uncomfortable truth, until we demand better, Richard Williams and countless others will continue to suffer, their dignity systematically stripped away, one dehumanizing moment at a time. I have to stop for a moment. What I see in this A&E goes beyond simple medicine. It's a human failure. I ask you, what would you do if this were your grandparent? Ignored, humiliated? We cannot stay silent. Silence is complicity. Get involved. Share this story, educate yourselves on the rights of the elderly, and raise your voice against the system. Now, back to Richard Williams. You see him there, Richard Williams, tucked away in cubicle 7, 86 years old, disoriented, frightened. He's been here for 9 hours already. 9. And for what? So we can finally tell him what he already knows. He's tired, he's lonely, and he's been ignored. My gut wrenches watching him every single time. This isn't medicine. It's a bureaucratic cage, and he, along with countless others, is trapped within its indifferent bars. The outrage burns in me, a constant simmering fire. We're not meant to just patch people up and send them back into the abyss of neglect. We're meant to care, to heal, to see them. But these elderly souls, they walk through these doors, and too often they become invisible. They're just a number, a bed blocker, a symptom of bed management crisis. Not a person with a lifetime of stories, a person who deserves dignity. I remember Richard earlier trying to explain his symptoms to Dr. Miller, who barely made eye contact. He just scrolled through the notes, muttering about polypharmacy and frailty. Richard, bless him, was trying to tell him about the shivering, the loneliness, the fear of falling again in his cold flat. And Miller's response? Eleonora, could you just get him sorted? It's probably just a common cold. They're old, aren't they? We have more urgent cases waiting. More urgent? What could be more urgent than a man shivering in his own fear, asking for a modicum of human connection? I stood there, boiling, feeling that familiar wave of helplessness wash over me. It's a systemic rot, isn't it? It starts with the casual dismissal, the whispered sighs when an ambulance brings in another faller. It's the way we dehumanize them, making them palatable as statistics rather than people. I saw a colleague leave Mrs. Henderson, 92 and incontinent, lying in a soiled pad for almost an hour because staffing levels were low. Her pleas were barely acknowledged. The shame on her face, the quiet dignity she tried to maintain, it broke me. It always breaks me. This isn't about medical diagnosis anymore. It's about a diagnosis of society itself. Are we so busy chasing the next technological marvel, the next groundbreaking cure, that we forget the most basic tenet of care, compassion? Do we truly see the elderly as a burden, as something to be managed and shunted aside until they simply cease to be? The sterile lights of this A&E, the constant hum of machines, it all seems to amplify their vulnerability, their despair. They are stripped of their independence, their privacy, their voice. Richard, left on a trolley in a crowded corridor for hours, listening to the cacophony around him, unable to sleep, unable to even hear himself think. He just wanted a blanket, a hot cup of tea, someone to listen. We preach about patient-centered care, but where is the center when a patient is left adrift in a sea of indifference? Where is the care when their greatest humiliation isn't their failing body, but the contempt shown by those meant to heal? My heart aches for them, for the resilience they show in the face of such profound neglect. I fight for them, I shout for them when no one else will, but there are only so many hours in a day, only so much of me to go around. This isn't just a hospital problem. It's a societal failing. We are letting them down, profoundly and inexcusably. It's time we all looked in the mirror and asked ourselves, is this truly the care we envision for our own futures? Because without a fundamental shift in our hearts and our systems, this is precisely what awaits us. I see it every single shift, a raw, undeniable shame festering in the heart of our A&E. You walk past the bright, relentless lights, the constant bleeping, the hurried footsteps, and if you look closely enough beyond the chaos, you see the true cost of our stretched system. It's not just about bed shortages or waiting lists. It's about a profound, sickening erosion of humanity. Richard Williams arrived last night, 84, sharp as a tack, but frail. His GP suspected a UTI, and he'd fallen a couple of times. Nothing dramatic, just the slow, relentless march of age demanding respect it rarely receives here. He was placed on a trolley in the corridor for 6 hours. 6 hours in full view of everyone trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. I found him looking utterly defeated, his eyes brimming with a silent plea that ripped right through me. He needed to use the commode badly, but the nurses were swamped. He was too embarrassed to ask again, too weak to try on his own. That's Richard, a man who once built bridges, now reduced to this. This is not care. It's a systematic stripping away of his very self. Dr. Miller, bless her pragmatic heart, swept past, muttering, "It's just a bit of confusion, Eleonora. Common cold, old age. We've got a major trauma coming in. Trauma. Yes, I understand trauma. But is the slow, agonizing trauma of feeling worthless, unseen, unheard, any less valid? Are we so desensitized that the elderly, those who built this very society, are now relegated to the bottom rung of our compassion ladder? They are not just old. They are people with histories, families, fears. And they deserve so much more than a clinical shrug and a long wait in a sterile corridor, desperately needing to relieve themselves, too proud and too vulnerable to keep asking. I look at Richard and I see my own grandmother. I see a mirror reflecting the horrifying truth of how we treat our aging population. It's a pervasive indifference, a quiet, almost imperceptible contempt that seeps into the very fabric of our healthcare. We talk about funding and resources, but what about fundamental respect? What about the simple act of acknowledging someone's presence, their discomfort, their fear? I watch as they are left to languish, their cries for help often mistaken for demanding behavior or simply age-related complaints. I hear colleagues dismissing concerns because, well, they're old. What do you expect? This isn't an isolated incident with Richard. I've seen Mrs. Davies with dementia, left without her glasses for hours, disoriented and terrified in a strange environment. I've seen Mr. Khan, deaf and alone, shouted at by a frustrated auxiliary because he couldn't hear instruction. These aren't just medical failings. They are moral ones. They are a stark, unforgivable betrayal of our most vulnerable. My heart aches with the helplessness I feel watching the dignity of these incredible individuals systematically dismantled. We are meant to heal, to comfort, to protect. But here, in this supposedly advanced institution, we are often complicit in their quiet suffering. This isn't just an ease shame. It's society's shameful secret, hidden behind the closed doors of an overloaded system. We have to look, truly look, at what we've become. We cannot allow the humanity to be drained from our care, leaving behind only the cold, sterile mechanics of medicine. The cost isn't just financial. It's paid in the despair and humiliation of people like Richard, who deserve so much better than to be forgotten. This isn't healthcare. It's a holding pen, a grim, fluorescent purgatory where the most vulnerable are simply shelved. I see it every single shift, and every single time, a part of me dies with them, with the silence of those who have lost their voice or whose voices are simply no longer heard. The sheer, utter indignity of it all. We talk about the NHS with such reverence, but what about the hidden corners, the ones where trust isn't just broken, but utterly obliterated? Take Richard Williams, 87 years old, a decorated veteran, a grandfather, a man who once built bridges, literally. He arrived this morning, confused, dehydrated, suspected UTI. Standard stuff for A&E, you might think, but that's where the rot sets in, isn't it? The standard stuff mindset. He was left for 6 hours on a trolley in the corridor, a mere meter from the bustling entrance, with people rushing past, eyes averted. 6 hours. Imagine being him. Imagine the cold, the noise, the sheer public humiliation of needing assistance, of being exposed, and feeling utterly invisible. He kept asking for a glass of water, a blanket, just a moment of privacy. His pleas, barely audible, were met with an exasperated sigh from one junior doctor, then a hurried, "We'll get to it, Richard. There are more urgent cases, you know." More urgent? What could possibly be more urgent than a man's dignity, his basic human needs? I found him later, after my own urgent cases slumped, his eyes brimming with tears, but too proud, too weary to let them fall. He'd soiled himself, not due to incontinence, but because he was too afraid to ask again, or perhaps because he was too weak to even raise the alarm louder than the din around him. The nurses were stretched, of course, perpetually understaffed, constantly apologizing for the impossible. But the shame on his face, that wasn't about staff shortages. It was about systemic neglect, about a dehumanizing conveyor belt that sees an 87-year-old man as a problem to be processed, not a person to be cared for. I argued with Dr. Davies, who just shrugged. "Look, Eleonora, it's a busy day. He's stable. His vital signs are fine. We can't dedicate a one-to-one to every elderly patient who's a bit confused, a bit confused." That phrase echoes in my head, a dismissive brush off that cheapens a lifetime. It's not about dedicated one-to-one care. It's about a fundamental shift in perception. It's about valuing lives that society, and increasingly this system, seems to deem less valuable. This isn't an isolated incident. I see Mrs. Henderson left with her supper untouched because she couldn't reach it, too proud to bother anyone. Mr. Patel, wandering disoriented, restrained purely because there wasn't enough staff to actually talk to him, to calm him. It's a pattern, a culture. We treat them like burdens, like broken machines, rather than the repositories of wisdom, history, and love that they are. We're so obsessed with efficiency, with throughput, that we forget the human cost. We forget that the broken trust we see in their eyes, the despair, isn't just about their failing health. It's about our failing humanity. What does it say about us as a society that we allow this, that we accept these conditions for those who paved the way for us? We're dimming our own future by abandoning our elders, teaching younger generations that their worth diminishes with age. If we cannot protect their dignity in their most vulnerable moments, then what hope do any of us have? This isn't just a hospital problem. It's a societal sickness. And until we confront that, until we demand respect, not just a diagnosis, for every single Richard Williams who walks through these doors, then this broken trust will only deepen and our future will remain profoundly, terrifyingly dim.